High Chancellor Varex rose from his seat at the center of the Galactic Council chamber, and his voice carried easily across the bright white hall. "Bring in the beast," he said. "Let the judgment begin." Daniel Hayes stood alone in the center of the chamber floor, hands clasped behind his back, facing 8 council members seated in a wide curved arc above him. He wore no weapon, no armor, nothing but his uniform and a small medical pouch strapped to his belt, standard issue for any soldier who might need it. Around the chamber's edge, security officers watched in silence, and not one of them expected the trial to last longer than a few seconds once the beast was released. Nobody in that chamber understood yet why this particular human had refused every offer of a weapon, a shield, even a simple restraint to hold the creature at bay. They assumed the answer was fear or perhaps foolishness. They were about to learn it was neither. Commander Zorak stood near the far wall, his hand resting on a heavy energy chain that stretched taut into the shadows of a containment archway. He was the council's most trusted enforcer, a soldier who had overseen a dozen trials exactly like this one, and he had never once seen the creature at the other end of that chain show mercy to anyone standing where Daniel now stood. "This is the council's final judgment," Zorak announced. "The creature has never spared a single soul brought before it. If the human survives, the council will consider the matter settled. If he does not, that too will be considered an answer." A murmur moved through the gathered council members, some leaning forward with open curiosity, others sitting rigid with the quiet discomfort of people who suspected they were about to witness something they wouldn't easily forget. Near the end of the curved table, an older counselor named Luma kept her eyes fixed not on Daniel, but on the archway itself, her expression unreadable in a way that suggested she had argued against this moment and lost. High Chancellor Varex had built his long career on one unshaken belief, that humanity was a species ruled by instinct rather than discipline, prone to violence the moment they felt cornered. Today's trial, in his mind, would simply confirm what generations of reports had already suggested. He gave the signal and Commander Zorak released the chain. The beast that emerged from the archway was unlike anything most of the humans who had ever set foot in that chamber had seen described in any briefing. It stood taller than 2 men, covered in dark plated hide, its jaws wide enough to end the trial in a single motion, and its eyes carried none of the dull aggression of a trained animal. They carried something closer to panic. It was called Kar, and according to every official record the council kept, it had never once spared a soul brought before it in judgment. A younger counselor near the end of the table murmured that 11 trials had ended exactly the same way, and that no species, however disciplined, had ever lasted more than a handful of seconds once the chain was released. Counselor Luma didn't answer him. She kept watching the beast's eyes instead of its jaws, the way someone watches a face they suspect is hiding something everyone else has already decided isn't worth looking for. Daniel didn't run. He didn't reach for the medical pouch at his belt, didn't raise his hands in defense, didn't even shift his footing into anything resembling a fighting stance. He simply watched the creature the way a man watches weather rolling in from a distance, calm, attentive, already calculating something the rest of the chamber hadn't thought to look for. He noticed the way Kar favored its front right leg the moment it landed from the archway, a barely perceptible hitch in its stride that no one trained to track violence would think to notice, because violence was all anyone in that chamber had ever been trained to expect from it. Nothing else about the creature seemed to matter to him yet. Just that single, fractional hesitation in an otherwise flawless landing. Commander Zorak smiled faintly, mistaking Daniel's stillness for the frozen panic of a man who had simply run out of options. "He's finished," he murmured to the officer beside him. "They always freeze exactly like this in the final seconds." High Chancellor Varex leaned toward the human beside him. "Soldier, this is your last opportunity to arm yourself. The council will not think less of you for it." "I won't need it, Chancellor," Daniel said, his eyes never leaving the beast. "Every soul who has stood where you're standing believed the same thing." "Then maybe they were looking at the wrong thing," Daniel said quietly. Kar's chest rose and fell in short, ragged pulls of air, nothing like the steady rhythm Daniel had expected from a predator closing in on easy prey. He filed the detail away without a word, watching, waiting. Kar charged. The sound of it crossing the chamber floor silenced every conversation at once. A full ton of muscle and plated hide closing the distance in 3 massive strides, jaws already opening wide enough to end the matter in a single strike. Council members rose from their seats. "End it now," one counselor shouted toward security, while another beside him grabbed his arm and said, "Wait, look at him, he isn't running." Security officers raised their weapons, waiting only for the Chancellor's word. Commander Zorak's hand moved toward the trigger of a containment charge built into the chamber floor, ready to end things the moment the beast made contact. Counselor Luma rose halfway from her seat, gripping the edge of the table. "Its leg," she said sharply to no one in particular. "Watch its leg." Daniel didn't move. At the very last instant, close enough that several council members would later swear the beast's breath had stirred the air around him, Daniel slowly lowered himself to one knee. The entire chamber froze. Every officer, every counselor, every held breath seemed to stop at once, certain they were witnessing a man collapsing in the final second before his death. Commander Zorak's finger hovered over the containment trigger, one heartbeat from ending the beast's charge by force. Daniel reached down, unfastened the small medical pouch at his belt, and drew out a strip of emergency bandage, holding it out flat across his open palm, not toward the beast's jaws but toward its injured leg. Car didn't stop. It roared, a sound that shook the chamber's glass panels and sent two council members stumbling backward over their own chairs, and lunged the final few feet with its jaws snapping wide, close enough that Daniel's hair stirred in the rush of its breath. Somewhere above, a counselor screamed for security to fire. Commander Zorak's finger closed hard over the containment trigger, one heartbeat from ending the beast where it stood. Daniel didn't move. He didn't pull the bandage back. He kept his palm exactly where it was, open and steady, and said nothing at all. The beast's jaws stopped a hand's width from his face. Its enormous frame skidded the final few feet, breath rushing hot and ragged across Daniel's skin, close enough that the chamber's silence became something almost physical. And then, for the first time in the council's recorded history of that creature, Carr simply stood there, staring down at the small human kneeling calmly beneath it, at the strip of white fabric offered without a trace of fear in the hand holding it. Nobody in that chamber understood what they were watching. High Chancellor Verex leaned forward in his seat, his certainty from moments earlier cracking into something he hadn't expected to feel today, genuine confusion. Around him, several counselors who had come prepared to witness a swift and brutal end now sat frozen in a silence none of them knew how to name. Slowly, carefully, Daniel reached up and pressed the bandage against the wound hidden beneath the armor plating on Carr's front leg, a dark stain spreading across the metal that hadn't been visible in any of the images the council had shown him before the trial began. The beast flinched once, a low sound rumbling deep in its chest that wasn't a growl at all, but something closer to a whimper, and then it lowered its massive head until it rested just above Daniel's shoulder, perfectly still, allowing the rapping to continue. Commander Zorak's hand fell away from the trigger entirely. "That's not possible," he said quietly. "It's never let anyone near it. Not once in 11 trials." Counselor Luma finally spoke, her voice carrying clearly across the silent chamber. "Perhaps no one ever tried to look at it as anything other than a weapon." Daniel finished securing the bandage, then rose slowly to his feet, one hand still resting gently against the beast's massive shoulder. Carr didn't pull away. It stood beside him, calm now in a way the chamber had never witnessed, its breathing finally settling into something steady and quiet. High Chancellor Verex sat in stunned silence for a long moment before finding his voice again. "Every civilization that has faced this creature tried to control it," he said. "Every single one across 100 years of council trials. You are the first to simply help it." "It wasn't attacking out of hatred, Chancellor," Daniel said. "It was in pain, and pain makes everyone look dangerous whether they mean to or not. I've seen that plenty of times in soldiers who'd never hurt anyone on a good day." The Chancellor studied him for a long moment, then rose from his seat, and every counselor beside him rose with him, a slow, quiet motion that filled the bright chamber with something far different from the tension that had opened the trial. Counselor Luma was the last to rise, and the smallest, most honest smile crossed her face, the look of someone who had argued for exactly this outcome and finally watched it prove itself true. "Today," Verex said, "humanity was not judged by strength. It was judged by mercy." Daniel glanced down at Carr, who leaned faintly against his side, then looked back up at the Chancellor. "Sometimes," he said, "they're the same thing." Verex turned toward Commander Zorak. "Strike this trial from council law, effective immediately. No creature will ever be brought into this chamber to answer for what fear alone made it do." He paused, looking down at Carr's bandaged leg. "And release this one from the council's custody entirely. It has already served a sentence it never should have been given." The council formally cleared him within the hour, striking the charge from the record entirely, though few in that chamber could have explained precisely what the charge had ever truly been for. Commander Zorak personally escorted Daniel from the chamber floor, though it was Carr who walked closest beside him, calm and unhurried, its massive frame trailing the man who had knelt in front of it when every instinct in the galaxy said to run. As Daniel passed beneath the archway where the trial had begun, the same council members who had risen from their seats expecting to witness an execution now stood in complete silence, watching one soldier and one beast walk quietly out of the chamber together. The chain that had once stretched taut through that archway hung empty now, and would never be used again. The same doorway that once carried the words, "Bring in the beast," would carry no such order for as long as the council stood.